Greetings, this is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today we are diving once more into the ancestries of Golarion, and another major one. We've previously talked about Dwarf. That was the first one I did in this series that I'm going to be doing, and certainly I'll talk about things like Halflings, Gnomes, Humans, all the major core ancestries, and a lot of the other ones I will go over, but today is Elf. And the Elves are a very interesting one to dive into, because the easiest way to describe them is they are aliens to Golarion, technically. And we'll talk about it. So, why don't we dive in, we'll talk about Elves and go over a lot of information about them. We'll start with one of the major sources I used, but there are a lot of minor sources too for you to use. That's not the one I want this one. So the Elves of Golarion is a book from 3.5, which provides a lot of this information, though things from the Inner Seas World Guide, the campaign setting, a number of other books, like some of the various setting books from over the ages, have provided a combination of all this information. But I would recommend the best bet is, if you want to look into this, you get some stuff from both the campaign setting, Inner Sea World Guide, and of course this one, the Elves of Golarion. This is a 3.5 book though, so it's a lot older, so probably easier to find in PDF. But a lot of the basics for what is here starts in that book. And there are a lot more that have come after there. Certainly. So, why don't we just dive into it here, then, properly. So, Elves. Sometimes fair ones, they're also referred to. And they are a very common race, ancestry, on Golarion. But they are also a people that are best described as decline. They had a culture which peaked many thousands of years ago, and because they are a very long-lived life, they're also very slow to have children, and they are very poor at repopulating a lot of their ancient homes and things like that they have lost over the years. Their main concentrations lie in 4 locations. So the first location, of course, is this one, Kyounin. So, Kyounin is an ancient homeland of the Elves on Golarion. I'll get into some of the Elven history to describe why it's very important to them, but as a bastion of power, it is a major one. It's over near Druma. It was technically abandoned by the Elves for near around 7,000 years, 8,000 years actually. So think about it that way. It was abandoned for 8,000 years, and returning to that after that time was difficult and has caused a lot of issues. It still remains one of the most major locations for elves, but it is also very broken off. You know, they tried to remain friendly with their neighbors, but there is tensions as they're technically a newcomer in the region, is the best way to describe it. I'll probably have to go into, in my guide to print locations in Golarion, go into Kyounin in detail, but we'll save that for another day. Another interesting location, in a way similar to Kyounin, is of course the Mordant Spire. Here seeing their symbol. It's on the Steaming Sea, on the southern tip of the Ironbound Archipelago, and these are home to the Mordant Spire Elves, which I'll talk about the difference there. Well, you can see their symbol a little bit better there. Let's do that for a second. They're very hostile towards outsiders, and it's one of the few remaining inhabited remnants of the Aslant continent, is Mordant Spire. So that's where it's at, the Aslant continent. And the thing is, they guard that area. They kind of have a belief here that anybody that kind of comes into the region is looking to cause a second Earthfall on Golarion. Something they don't want. We'll talk about the Mordant Spire Elves more as we go, though. There are 2 other groups which I'm not going to throw their symbols out for. But there's a number of elves in the jungle, in the Mualijae Expanse, in their jungle areas, and the wild nations of Varisia. There is one final group which is both canon and technically possibly not going to be canon anymore because of changes that are happening with the upgraded version of the core rulebooks. Again, this is a lot different than the D&D upgrade, which is happening around the time period this video is coming out. There's the Pathfinder one, if you've heard about it. Basically, they're also changing some lore because there are things that they have to get away from being as connected to the old D&D past. And one of the ones I'm going to talk about today, which is less proper anymore, is Drow. We'll talk about the Golarion version of them and whether or not they will exist in some kind of way. They probably won't. There are other groups that might, because there's another group that's based upon them loosely that might remain and might be their own thing then. I'm unsure about that one. So there is some changes that are occurring, and we'll talk about them as we go. But just keep in mind that there are things that are changing in the nature of what's going on here. Oh, that's not the one we're going to go. Is that? Yeah, okay. So, the other place that elves are from, and I'm giving this nice image here, are, actually, let's do that later. Let's do this actually later. After, yeah. We'll do that in a minute. We'll do this one first. I have to figure out the order of these. I just messed up my order of images. But here we go. Hey, Daniel Alchemist. Anyway, elves. They're very tall, they're slender, they're humanoids. They're a lot more slender than humans. Their lifespan is much longer than humans. They measure their lifespan in centuries. While 1 century might be a human's lifespan, they are many centuries. But one of the disadvantages they have is their bodies are frailer than humans. They're often seen as being very elegant in appearance and movement, kind of almost supernaturally graceful. They have a coloration that varies far less than humans, and the Avastian elves, which are one of the main groups of elves, I'll talk about the different groups of elves, similar I talked about the different groups of dwarfs, are very pale and fair-skinned, pretty much no freckles or blemishes. Eye colors are generally bright green or dark blue, though some range to nearly black. It's this way that their irises disseminate differently from others, and they're much larger than other humanoids, making it seem like they have little or no whites to their eyes. This does kind of make elves seem a little alien or very unreadable to other main species, humans and dwarfs. Hair is usually straight and healthy, fair, some possess pure white. Neither males or females go bald, and there isn't a lot of signs of aging. Aging is very graceful for them, too. They have, of course, ears that are generally 6 to 9 inches long and pointed backwards, angling a little slightly at the end, usually parallel to the crown of the forehead. Unlike a lot of other humanoids, there isn't a lot of sexual dimorphism between the elves. Males are a little taller, maybe a little broadly, never broader than a human male. They are lean, fit, very good metabolisms, don't grow facial hair, and not much body hair at all. And, usually hair's around shoulder length. Female elves are maybe a little bit more slender, willowy, oftentimes considered a sign of beauty. About as tall as a human male, so a little shorter than elven male, but certainly lighter of frame and weight than most human females. A lot of elves have a very otherworldly beauty that kind of comes with these wilderness communities, cosmopolitan situations, and they often dress very glamorously. So that is, in general, yeah. So, elves are people that enjoy laughter, and many of them will do things like pull pranks. It's quite impervious, and the thing is, yes, that seems like a weird thing of elves pulling pranks. But the thing is, they're seek new experiences. They do live a long time, and this has driven them to oftentimes seek out things that are different. And these new experiences can be a detriment to their own well-being. This might lead people to think they're thoughtless or callous. They really aren't. They do value friendship very highly, make friends easily. Friendships can turn romantic, be that with their own kind or others. A lot of others see elves as being content to live out their lives in quiet contemplation in the same place they were born. And that's true for some. Some are like that. But there are a lot of others that would want to wanderlust and wish to see the world in all of its differences. And because they have the time to do it, they kind of feel like they can. I have the time that I could walk to all the corners of the world and see everything that's there. That's an attitude that many elves look at because they want to experience this. They want to have something, they want to have that joy and see the beauty in the world and see that everywhere. The new experiences go into these places. So a lot of elf adventurers are there to find beauty or discovery and kind of things like that. And there are plenty that take advantage of both their very dexterous nature or their intellectual curiosities. Things like rangers, rogues, alchemists, wizards are a lot of preferred ones, but technically any class can be available. It's just that your typical elven adventurer kind of fits under some of those groups. Let's talk about the history of elves. So now here's where the interesting things come in here. Ba-boom! This is a very interesting picture here, which I will actually have this version of it because it's a little bigger. Switch between it. Welcome to Castrovel. So elves are an ancient race, and though elven historians do still debate on whether it originated on Golarion or on Saurian, which is a continent on Castrovel, another planet in the Golarion solar system, the oldest archaeological evidence to this point says that El, the oldest city on Saurian, has the oldest evidence of any elves, and is far older than that of the Elves of Golarion. So we are seeing that. Castrovel being the second planet from the sun, and the closest neighbor to Golarion. Their main civilization is represented by this nice lady here that we're kind of showing off, Alashunta, which are matriarchal humanoids that are psychic, that basically rule the planet. Well, why aren't the elves involved with them? Well, Saurian is a refuge because it has basically, on Castrovel, it's a small continent, it's isolated from a lot of the larger continents, and a lot of storms and heavy winds make it very difficult for anybody to travel there. So certainly, maybe the other natives of the planet Castrovel are aware of the elves there. It's just not easy to get to them in first place. So they're separated out there. The deities of the Elven Pantheon, which I'll talk about, were originally from this continent here, though they have a connection down to Golarion because of the elves there. And of course I did talk about El, which is the capital of Saurian. It's still in existence on that area. It is, again, the archaeological say it's the most ancient place there. So, it is a place that exists and could be visited technically if you know about it and can find your way there. Though, again, we'll talk about this entire thing and break it down a little bit more. But that's the basic idea of Castrovel. And we'll talk about this more in a second here. Alright. So, likely, because that's around the time they appeared, elves migrated to Golarion from Castrovel during the late Age of Serpents. The Age of Serpents being the time period where the Serpentfolk Empire ruled a large part of Golarion, and their empire, basically towards the end of it, was declining. Serpentfolk were the main group here. Just as a note, it's not to be confirmed, right now. But if you're looking to things that are going on with the Drow, they are effectively... Their role in the Darklands is being replaced by Serpent Folk that remain. Serpent Folk are still a thing on Golarion. Might be able to play them too, honestly. I'm not sure. I might have rules for it in one of the editions. But anyway, they are one that I will have to talk about at some point in time, regardless. But that was basically when elves are seen to be on Golarion. Again, what the exact history of elves in Golarion and Castrovel is, so long ago, lost to time. But Age of Serpents, especially even the late Age of Serpents, can I give a time frame of when that was? I can give a time frame. Give me a second. Age of Golarion timeline. Thank you. The Age of Serpents is unknown how long ago it was. That's basically pre-humanity, is what Age of Serpents is. So elves showed up in pre-humanity. Age of Legends is the time before Earthfall. Earthfall was in -5293. So that's kind of like... They showed up in the back end before humanity really showed up. And then so Age of Legends was the next one, which is from the prehistoric times to the Starstone and the Earthfall and destruction of that, leading to the Age of Darkness, where you had, a lot of major nations, the Aslanti, the Thessalonians, the Cyclop Nation, the Dragon Rulers of TNZ, a lot of major nations. But during this time period, though, this is when the civilization of the elves reached their peak. This ancient elf presence is pretty much gone. They are believed to be the first civilization to rise in Golarion because of this, after the Serpentfall time period. The Serpent Folk time period. And yes, early human cultures came into conflict with the elves, but because elves are very long-lived and not short-sighted, they know they have a very low birth rate. They understood that these other beings that have a very high birth rate, and there's a lot of them, they're going to eventually have to secede most of their land to that. So elves did turn away from their attention from Golarion to other planets. And that's where these come in. Where I'm showing here, it's an elf gate. They're basically interplanetary gates that have a vast difference between them. This was the way that elves came to Golarion, theoretically, or at least was connected with Castrovel. They're also known as Idura, and they can have magical transportation between places in Golarion. They did. There are a number of known elf capes that some do still survive. One of the major adventures in Pathfinder 2nd Edition deals with Alestia's Ring, which is a group of elf gates. I believe that is... Hell Knight Hill. Oh, Ashes to Ashes. Ashes of Ashes. Age of Ashes. It's the Age of Ashes adventure path. That's the one I did a little bit of, if I'm going to talk about it, I believe. Yep. Because the Hell Knight Hill is the adventure I did. Sorry, it took me a while to remember, because I always remember I did that adventure path, but I didn't remember which one it was. But it deals with the elf gates. And some of them. There are other known ones, and certainly there's a connection with Castrovel. The network was pretty significant at one point in time, though most of them have been damaged or destroyed. You need some kind of key to travel between them. These were also connected with Alesta, the goddess of doorways. We'll talk about her a little bit more when we talk about those. And it does, other than the network allowing travel between Golarion, it did allow them interplanetary and to explore a bunch of the solar system and things like that. But elf diviners and astrologers found out about Earthfall. And it was these gates that the elves escaped. They mass migrated to their homeland of Sorvia and basically remained in isolation for thousands of years after that, they disappeared. They left. And they left some behind. Let's talk about one of the groups they left behind here, because they left behind, of course, some that went to the Darklands. Everybody's favorite, the Darklands. Yes. The Darklands is what formed what would be called the Drow now. The Darklands is the subterranean areas, the caverns, vaults, passages, beneath Golarion's continents, basically found throughout the world. There's 3 different layers. The farther down you get, the more corruption of Rovagug, the apocalypse deity, exists. Serpent folk once ruled this part also during the Age of during the Age of Legends, after the Driven Surface Serpent folk ruled there. Of course, the elves that became the Drow went there. Again, replacement, probably just Serpent folks are there. Drow might not exist. We'll talk about what that means for some things too. But regardless, that's how they formed and their version of the culture. In Golarion, they were corrupted by Rovagug. Yay. Dark, evil, apocalypse deity corrupting everybody that's down there. The corruption of the Darklands exists to many other species. The Duergar are down there, the Darrow. There's a lot of beings that have been corrupted by the Darklands. A lot of species that went deep and went mad. But, so, again, that was around the, God, you know, I had that for a second. I was at negative 5293 AR that occurred. Well, elves were gone from the planet. After 8,000 years, though, in 2632, they returned. They began basically returning in mass through this Savodian stone located in Kyounin. The idea was prompted by a demon, Terazar, who was attempting to corrupt the portal to his own ends. So there's a lot more to the story then. But basically, you know, it was they kind of sensed old human enemies had grown out of barbaric organisms. The two races could share the world. Basically, they also found out, you know, oh, hey, humans, they're not so much barbaric anymore. We can kind of share the world with them. But them reclaiming their ancient holdings caused some issues. Basically, because they had to reclaim a bunch of lands. And again, 2632 was quite a while ago. There were some signs of some of the nations that exist today in Golarion, some 2,000 years later. But there's also a lot of issues that are going on. You know, it was certainly a tumultuous year. Yeah. It's actually 4723 now, so the elves have been back for a little over 2,100 years. Which has been enough time to establish themselves, certainly again, but things 2,100 years ago, Golarion was a much different planet. There were certainly some signs of the civilizations that exist today, but a lot of, like, random warlords and things existed there, too. They came into contact with their brethren who did not leave the planet, and some of those were negative, aka Drow as they exist in the old lore and new lore again. We talk about that. And anyway, many of these elves that came back here to Avastian not only settled the ancient kingdom of Kyounin where they came back, but many sailed west to the Mount Spire or traveled to various points in the world to connect up with their brethren. That's why there are elves in a lot of places in the world. You can go to pretty much anywhere and maybe find some elves. They've spread out since they came back. Oh, I'm sorry. The Elves Return should have been that one there. The Elves Returns. This is an example of the Elf Cape. These are just some of the heroes there. So, let's talk about some cultural things here. I'm showing off here one of the ephemeral lords, but we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about the languages of elves. Certainly, most elves are fluent in Taldane, the common language of Vastian. Remember, they came to the Avastian continent where Kyounin is. That's where most of them settled. So most of them learned the language of that region of the world, which is Taldane. But they also speak Elven. It is believed to be the eldest language, one of the eldest language mortals speak in Golarion is basically what I mean. That's the thought of Elven. If it isn't the eldest, it's one of the closest ones that mortal creatures speak in Golarion. There's conjecture that Elven was formed by some Sylvan speakers, basically introducing some grammatical rules and vocabulary for both Celestial and Draconic, combining them together. The Elven alphabet has 33 letters, 24 consonants, and 9 vowels. It's a very complex language, and it kind of sounds poetic in tone and cadence. Elves are also renowned for their beautiful artwork, crafts. There are many great tailors, herbalists, spice traders, perfumers, artisans, cartographers, and beauticians. And most elves who live in non-elven communities earn their living as artisans. Basically, a lot of those that move into places in human towns or dwarven places find that their artistic skills are the way to make their way. Speaking of religion, since I'm showing off the ephemeral lords, elves are not particularly a religious species. Yes, certainly there are those that follow religions, and certainly there are those that can be very devout. But the majority of elves are basically like casual devotees of religion. The ephemeral lords are one that can be seen very often, rarely for major religions, but are one that are seen. They're basically powerful demigod outsiders, angels, archons, azadas, good outsiders they tend to be, or good aligned outsiders. Other major deities are Callistre, the goddess of lust and revenge, Desna, one of the first deities, the kind of goddess of, I guess, dreams dreams, luck, star, travelers is a major one, so Desna's a very important one. Nethys, of course, the Grundi god of magic, who's found a lot of popularity outside of Grund. But again, Grund and Vastia are neighbor continents, so it's very easy to see why Nethys gained a lot of popularity there. And Shellin, the goddess of art, beauty, love, and music. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other deities. Situationally, you can find things like the Forlorn, who I'll talk about, worship Pharasma, the neutral goddess of death. The Mordant Spire elves also revere Gozera, the deity of the sea and sky. Now, similar to the dwarfs that I talked about previously, elves do have a number of their own deities. There are major deities that they have. These are minor deities, technically. They're elven deities, but they are just elven deities, so they are minor. And Alistae, the goddess of transitions and magical elf gates, is one of the major ones from amongst them. She's the goddess of doorways, portals, and thresholds. And let me switch images here to that one there. There you go. That's supposed to be a depiction of Alistae. So, again, informally, she's the goddess of, teleportation and stuff, but she's not the only one. There's also, I'm gonna butcher some of these, Findelad Lara, the elven goddess of art and architecture. Yes, I tried. I'm going to say there, I tried. So that is another deity there. There's also Catephius, the light-tipped goddess of the elven god of the hunt, an archenemy of Terrarazer, the demon lord I'd mentioned. So, yep. And there's also Urella, the elven goddess of magic, who's a patron of both divine and arcane magic, but prefers magic that deals with the natural world, regardless of it. So those are your technically minor, but elven deities too. Elves, when they die, prefer to be buried in natural surroundings, mummified in a bog, and turned in a still forest beneath a saw snappling. Death is an inevitable event because they are long-lived species, so you know, some of them do prefer elaborate deaths to be laid to rest, you know, some like a stone tomb, so others can remember them. But again, you know, it still has to be kind of natural. A stone tomb is still, in a way, natural. And there are elves do believe that have a level of reincarnation to them. On their death, they're reincarnated into another creature, and the ultimate goal of reincarnation is to be born as a natural creature of the wild. And so they follow this brightness, the idea. Signals a percent that lead them to a higher destiny. Let's talk about the Forlorn. So, let's switch over to my image here to our good friend, the Forlorn. Switch that there. And we'll see one of the Pathfinder iconics, Maricel, who's a Forlorn elf. Forlorn are not an ethnicity of elves. They're a major member of the elven community, but they're a different category of elves. It's basically based on upbringing. A Forlorn is one that spends a lengthy childhood in a non-elven, usually human community. And they tend to be a little bit more melancholy because they deal directly with the imbalance of life expectancies. The thing is, a lot of elves, they do have, like, you know, oh, I'll have a lover here, I'll have a lover there. They passed away, you know. Maybe they were elven, maybe they're human, you know. They have the connection of elven communities. The Forlorn basically have adopted families, almost. The earliest members of these are elves who didn't abandon Golarion, basically during the time of Earthfall. They were still there and were kind of adopted in other communities that remained after Earthfall. Effectively, they witness decay, death of all the people that are there to help raise them, their friends and family that are not elf, and it has an effect on them, that they outlive them so easily. So, many become downcast, some even withdraw entirely from other people. Some just travel from place to place because they see any place that could be called home tainted by death. And the thing is, there can be prejudices from both humans and elves that affect them then too. Because your average elf sees Forlorn, again, in upbringing, not an ethnicity, they see them with kind of a pity and mistrust. The same way that a lot of times, unfortunately, half-elves are kind of marginalized by elves, for various reasons. Their non-elvish upbringing is seen as basically a disability, almost. There are open-minded individuals. A good example is, of course, the current Queen of Kyounin. Queen Telendia Dasriel. Again, I'm going to butcher these names, so forgiveness that. She, in fact, actually would love to bring these scarred individuals into elven society and find better lives for them. She wants the Forlorn to come to Kyounin and be like, we can help you, like, we'll give you elven therapy, you know? Be with some of your own kind and feel like, you know, yes, death is an important thing in our world, but you can be with people that you can form bonds with that you're not going to lose. Come live with us. We can help you out, you know? And again, there are some disadvantages and advantages to that mindset, but certainly the idea that, yes, long-lived creatures in with lower-lived creatures can be kind of damaging. The thing is, the Forlorn and other elves, most Golarions, especially the short-lived ones like humans, don't see any differences. I mean, the somber attitude, which can be mistaken for aloofness, is a major one. And Forlorn are seen very well because of their kind of nature. They make very well guards for merchants and caravan leaders because they have perceptness and connections to the natural world, because a lot of them, again, travel. And again, similarly, Desna is an important deity for a lot of Forlorn because they travel a lot. So they'll give some thanks to Desna. So, let's talk diversity in elves. Certainly, elves are divided into basically cultural groups. Very much so like humans when I talk about them. Even dwarves have some cultural groups I talked about. But elves adapt very well to their natural world. So most elves are very, so while most elves are physically similar to the Elves of Kyounin, there are those that radically depart from their ancestral stock. Basically, it's not necessarily ethnic lineages, unlike with humans, but basically, elven species is very good at adaptation. And so that's one of their actual advantages as a very natural connected species. So in the various habitats they've settled in, they physically adapt a lot more than culturally adapt. And it does occur gradually over centuries. A single elf's appearance can actually change dramatically over the course of their entire life if they're in that same environment the entire time. So elves themselves physically will adapt. If I'm a Audian elf, and basically I would go to the far north, the crown of the world, I'd start looking like the Ilverani elves a little bit. Probably not all the way, but I'd start adapting that direction. I'll talk about these different ones. So the Audian elves are the most common ethnicity of elves in the Inner Sea region. When you think of elf culture, you think the Audian culture. They are the direct descendants of the elves that returned to Golarion in the 27th century using the Severian stone. They are the returners. Certainly some of these returners have spread out and become some other groups here, but a lot of the other elf cultures that remain are from some that remained behind. The Aquatic Elves. So, they are cousins of their land-breathing brethren. They're particularly in the Steaming Sea and the Arcadian Ocean. They are closely resembling their land-dwelling kin, though they have gills and they can for breathing underwater and web fingers for swimming. They live on cities in the ocean floor. They have own developments of their own. There are those that do live in small as hermits, some that are in small communities for mutual defense. But there are two larger cities that exist on the Arcadian Ocean. Close to Aslanti. There's Irem, and, God, I'm going to butcher this one, Quathrim. Quathrim? Close enough. Their exact locations are very unknown because they have a lot of enemies under the sea. But you also get aquatic half-elves, which are known as shoreborn, and they are half-elves within... So that's basically what they're called. Each type of half-elf basically has a phrase to almost determine it. Like, those that come from the Audian are gateborn, for when it comes to half-elves. The shoreborn are half-aquatic elves, of course. And there are Malenti, but Malenti are not aquatic elves. They look like that. They're actually Sahagan. I never pronounced that one right. Mutants. So those are the aquatic elves. Let's talk Drow, the Elves of the Darklands, because we've got to talk about them while they technically still exist. And again, their existence and use is up in questions, I'm going to say right now. But the idea is they were originally the elves that refused to abandon Golarion when the Starstone hit the world. They escaped to the Darklands to survive it, and it was the influence of Roguvog that they became a demon-worshipping culture. Roguvog does a lot of horrible things, and became bitter, twisted enemies of the surface dwarves. Half-Drow are known as Darkborn by humans, or Thin-Bloods by Drow, and are basically, the same thing as half-elves. They're really, really the depths of the culture that exists for Golarion drow, as they do now, is very different than what would be called for something like D&D. It's just that the fact that the concept of them is very connected up with D&D stuff, so it's, again, taking a few steps behind it. So, anyway, there is information on them if you still want to use them. They are kind of becoming more of a legacy thing. I won't go into depths about them now because they are kind of becoming a legacy portion of the entire thing here, but certainly it's something to keep in mind. So if you want to use it or not, let's talk about as I butcher their name again, Ilverani. So the Ilverani are a group that live in the mountains in the crown of the world. They're pale-skinned elves. They're gruff towards outsider and respect shows of force. They're snowcaster elves, snowcasters, snow elves. They're pale skin and like always having a mostly white hair matching their snow-colored homeland, with blue and silver clothing are kind of the mark there. They're another group that they descended from Mualijae elves who chose not to flee underground or go to the Severian. And Mualijae is the elven nation that was in one of the region close to here, basically at the end of Earthfall, resisted Thessalonians' aggressions and stuff. Some escaped to basically Severian. Others basically split apart. This was one of the idea was one of three groups. One went to another planet. One of this group of the Mualijae went to the planet. Some went underground. These guys decided to go north. They built special above-ground shelters to save as many people as possible, and then traveled north and becoming the Ilverani. Their shelters are no longer necessary. They do help others to honor that legacy, but they do have a distrust of strangers, which is the idea maybe there's some kind of historical betrayal to them. So they are generally good-hearted, but can also be seen as very cold and unyielding to intruders. Peaceful travelers, can usually pass through their area unharmed, maybe pay a toll. There are certainly those that have very false tales about them. It's sort of this mixture of, if you are our guest, we're going to treat you right, but you have to prove worthy to be our guest kind of thing, I guess. So there is a level of xenophobia in the entire thing. So they live in these isolated tribal villages, oftentimes near ancient ruins or holy sites. Homes and families are very important, and they many worship Philandaria, the goddess of art and architecture. I'd mentioned that one before. I'm butchering it so badly there. Findeldalara. Ugh, God. Elven names, why? Oh, my. They do sharply deserve from most Elven society, though. They have their own traditions that they're familiar with, that have developed over the, honestly, 8,000 years they've been separate from the average the elves that we know, mostly. Shows of force are important to them, but do not resort to violence unless provoked. They don't do that. So sort of like, if you show, but don't tell, it's important to them. Their sentries are always talented survivalists and guardians who use the environment to their advantage. And they do have an active elf gate known as the Ice Gate. So, hey. The only problem with that is, again, even if you could use it, their nature as being kind of a little brutish and standoffish means that people don't really like to use that. Even elves that control other gates certainly don't want to do that. So, there are a group within them known as the Twilight Speakers. There basically is roles to interact with the outside races and they basically have a religious duty to the favored deity also. But the problem with a lot of Twilight casters is they can end up straying from the path in exile. Why? Because they're exposed to outside groups, and that's where Snowcaster Half-Elves or Snowborn come from. Yeah, most are the children of Twilight speakers who are like, hey, outsider, my job is to interact with you. I kind of like you. You know. So the parent and child are kind of exiled from Ilverani society, but, you know, that's a thing there too. So there is some... Honestly, again, it's the keeping to themselves kind of thing. We then have to talk about the Jininese Elves, which I will show the image of the flag of Jin, their nation. Now, here's where an issue comes in, because the Jininese are supposed to be a group of elves that split off from those that would become the Drow during the descent to the Darklands. Basically, those that were descending in the Darklands, a group of them split off and went on a very long journey, which took them to Tianzi. You know, it's a very far away, and they founded the nation of Jin, or Jinin. 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 We'll say Jinin. That's the thing is, you know, they arrived basically in negative 480-43 in Tianzi a long time later, and they founded a country, and they've adopted the samurai traditions of Minkai since then. So they have this mixture of old Elven culture and Tianzi culture and something like that. But they are a group that technically is descended from that group also that went underground, so maybe they could just be separate there. You know, there's rewriting that can easily be done, but they're basically refugees that kind of been there and followed their way all the way over to here. So they are a group to speak about. But let's talk about our good friends here, the Mordant Spire Elves. The Spire Sworn or Grey Elves. They're the Elves of Mordant Spire. I mentioned how Mordant Spire is a kind of guardian of the Aslanti continent, what's left of it. They're very arrogant, standoffish, even towards other elves. They basically, again, as I mentioned, see themselves as the keepers of the secrets of the lost Aslant civilizations. They don't want another Earthfall to happen. They're a little bit more pale-skinned. They usually wear masks. They only speak Aslanti to outsiders. So they're one of the few people in that entire region that still speak the Aslanti language natively. They do have a number of strange mannerisms. They rarely look at those they speak to, often cutting off conversations in mid-sentences, and act as if they're listening to voices that no one can hear. Similar to the other elves of Sorvian, they were part of the general return to 2632. They originally came from this region, so they returned back here. Their group was one of the first ones to represent what was going on with the Starstone and Earthfall. So they were the first ones to recognize it and warn the other elves. They were very efficient at rebuilding their home. Hey, guess what? No one was really settling the Aslanti continent because of all the shit that happened there and its destruction during the Earthfall. Turns out no one wanted to live there, or it was very difficult to. So they're able easily to rebuild their home, take it over, and basically then cut themselves off from the rest of the world and maintain this control of the entire area, patrolling the waters of the lost continent, basically removing trespassers. There has been a little bit of a recent shift, though, because there are Aslant colonists that do exist, and the idea, though, is that there's this a go-through perils that are beginning to grow in that region. The go-through being basically, as I've mentioned in the past, Abolus, the cause of Earthfall. So, this development of them being a little bit more threatening has basically caused the Spire to gradually open themselves up to working with some others and allowing them to be there. So yeah, they're a very interesting group. They don't have really trade with the outsiders. They're around the main island. They have a lot of floating wicker buildings where they're used for fishing, which they spend a lot of time fishing and diving in the steaming sea, tending kelp beds in the shallow waters, so that they don't have to have a lot of trades. They were enemies with Aslant in the ancient days, and basically have seen that they are now protectors of their legacy. So they protect a lot of items from treasure hunters. They have fast-moving skimmers that might be magical to catch up with anybody. And yeah, if you're trying to plunder the Aslant, they're going to come for you. And they have a pretty deep organization here. And again, as I mentioned previously, Gozra's one of their main deities, and the other Elven deities are pretty high there. The thing is, Spireborn do exist. Half-elves who come from Mordant Spire elves. Spireborn are actually quite valued in the Mordant Spire elves. They're used as ambassadors and spies, and they're very useful for dealing with outsiders. Of all the other groups, and especially even elves, they do keep cordial relations with the Aquatic Elves that live in the nearby waters. Because they can make deals for their aquatic water-breathing brethren to bring up Aslanti treasures from the depths so that they may guard them, it can kind of be one of those things. So the relationship is not always smooth, land versus sea, but, they do have some good connections. And they have other connections with other groups, too. So, like Pathfinder Society, they have good connections with. Bitter Foes of the Agaluth. Connections with some merfolks of the area. And other groups. Even the... So anyway. That's the Mordant Spire Elves. Now, let's talk about another group that stayed behind. And that is the Elves of the Mualijae Expanse. The jungle-dwelling Elves of the Mualijae Expanse are the Mualijae. So the Mualijae is the main group of them, if you're talking about them. These are elves that remained in Golarion. They fled, while some fled to Severian. Remember, the elves that fled technically were around Avastia. I've kind of mentioned how where their homeland is in Kyounin, that's in Vastia. Grund, which is very far south to it, is a very far place to run to. So they did. And the Mualijae have long ago three distinct cultural groups. In the north is the... I'm going to try to say these properly. The Mualijae, the Ikujae in the west, and the Mualijae in the northwest. So the northwest and the west are them. They were once a single nation, but have basically splintered since then. And here is an elf of the Ikujae tribe. So, the Ikujae are a militant, or the western group of them. They're the most militant group. They are a united nation of numerous clans with basically strong relationships. Many are still self-sufficient, so, there is a mistake that they are separate from each other. That is an important thing to mention. They are not. Clan leaders and advisors are chosen democratically with adults all voting. If it's a continuous election, a new leader might have to prove their worth by fulfilling a demanding task for the people. Clan leaders can elect a king or queen among themselves, but only take this position when a central authority is needed in times of emergency. So remember, one united nation of elves, but each are basically self-sufficient little groups that, when called for, will get together, and certainly, if something's going on, are going to inform each other. So yeah. Basically, Earthfall happened, and in the wake of it, there was a manifestation of the Hawk, which is a patron deity of the evil dragons, particularly chromatic dragons, and was going to wreak havoc in Golarion in the afterthought. And it drew attention of Apsu, the good metallic dragon deity. So a lot of heroes of the Mualijae basically gave their lives to help defeat the Hawk, and effectively then that's what drove them into that region there. So anyway, they are known to have jet black eyes of elves, black hair and brown skin of the Mualijae human neighbors. They're more muscular than average elves, but still lanky by human standards. They often adorn themselves with white paint, and it individually is the most essential aspect. The white paint would represent family, clan, personal history, accomplishments, professions, maybe even mood. So the symbols that they will paint on themselves will change frequently, and can be often it can change, but changing it too frequently is considered flighty, basically. They wear greens and brown clothing, good for jungle camouflage. They usually make clothing from wood, leaves, leathers, furs, bones, and enhance it through magic. They find a sacred duty of preparing for Dahaka's return, so that's why they train for combat. The Elven Goddess of Magic, Uriel, is their patron deity of this group, though they do give worship to the other Elven deities, and even Desna and Calistria. They will find worship deities a lot more frequent. Mualijae half-elves are called Wildborn, and that's about it. Nothing other different about them. I don't have other pictures of the others, so I'm not going to switch them, but we'll keep talking about the others. The Mualijae are another group. They're the ones that are in the northern jungles of Mualijae Expanse. They compete for living space with lizard folks and boggards. They protect the ruins of Nagasa, the White City, from outsiders. And their culture is a study to purify Nagasa of the fiendish corruption that it's kind of had. Nagasa being a ancient ruined city that was once an elven city in the Mualijae Expanse from the old civilization the three tribes broke from. So again, dark skin that they have like the Mualijae people, but they also have a higher than average rate of albinism, and I do not know this word, but I will look it up. Vitiligo. Vitiligo? What is vitiligo? Albinism and vitiligo. The loss of skin color in patches. Okay. Leading patches and powders of lighter skin and white hair. Yeah, okay. Their eyes are bright, often feckled, with glowing shades of red and orange. And many have curled dark brown hair. So basically, while the Mualijae have prophecies foretold of an ancient evil returning, they see it as the dragon deity they fought. The ancestors of Mualijae broke away, that they had a different opinion on what this evil was. And finding the city of Nagasa in -501 AR, abandoned the jungle of elven make, with the city's pyramids and to be temples of various demon lords, opening portals to the abyss. They felt it reasonable to split off from the other, from the Mualijae, and they basically came to spend their time here trying to purify it and stop the abyssal hordes from coming in this one place. So Noctilis is popular among them for a religious deity, which is Redeemer, Queen, Goddess of Artists, Midnights, and Exiles, a former Demon Lord, Noctulia, who became a goddess, and Interesting. She's chaotic good, chaotic neutral deities. Oh, she's chaotic neutral. I did fucking Wrath of Righteous something. God, yeah, thanks, Wrath of Righteous. Yep, related to that. Oh, I guess because she's a redeemed demon lord, and she would have had a pyramid there. Oh my god, that makes sense. So, that makes sense why she's become popular amongst them. Oh my god. Hey, yeah, Noctulia is a reformed demon lord who became a goddess during the Wrath of Righteous stuff things, according to the official timeline. Turns out that, when you have a bunch of pyramids dedicated to demon lords in an elven city, which is really weird, which you're trying to spend 8,000 years purifying, actually technically more like 9,000 years, and one of them gets purified, you're going to be like, this is an example, let's look to this. They also worship Desna, Findeldiaria, Iori, and Nethys. But that makes a lot of sense. The final tribe is the Mualijae. They are the northwestern jungles. They oppose the gorilla king Usuro. They've largely set around Lake Octo in small conclaves. They're usually temporary, often being rebuilt. They have two major settlements, Haven, a large settlement in an island in the middle of Loch Dodo, and Beri Nibi in the Bandu Hills. So these are a lot more tribal. They've split away from the other two groups. One of them which occupies a city, the other which is a bunch of connected tribes. They're a lot more separated out. Those are the Elves of the Mualijae Expanse. And finally, the elven group to talk about is the Vourinoi, the nomadic elves native to the deserts of northern Garund. They worship Desna and do have close ties to the Mualijae. I'm sorry, the Mualijae is the entire group. It was the Ekujae, which are the ones that are connected together. Mualijae is the, breaking apart there's a lot of these terms. So they're desert elves or oasis elves. They often settle near Osirion's fertile river valleys and establish settlements near oases. So Osirion is one of the places they find home. They have a dark brown skin, black hair, though there are individuals who have blue, green, or white hair. They are very well aware of their home, the desert's inhospitality, and are very gregarious and welcoming towards travelers and nomads who pass by their land, offering shelter and water very eagerly. They're charming and eloquent and prefer peaceful resolutions to conflict, but they are very fiercely independent and view themselves separate than any human nations. And due to their skill at magic and warfare, the pharaohs of Osirion, which I've talked about in a video you might want to check out on the channel, have basically left them alone. Anyone who dares to control or corrupt the oases quickly earns the ire of them. They mostly worship Desna, traveling, seeing new faces, even by elder standards, and are fond of visiting the various Mualijae cousins in the Mualijae Expanse, and vice versa. A lot of them actually do also believe in the brightness philosophy, which I mentioned, of the reincarnation of beyond death, that is a much more older for the Iredin elves, for something that's much more old elf belief, kind of old world elf, I could say, because, planet and stuff like that. But, yes. Anyway. Those are elves. So, yeah. That's the Golarion elves. And, again, technically they're alien, yet not. Because an interesting thing about them is the oldest history we can date back is to the planet Castrovel. And that they probably originated there and then through magical means spread out to other places, including the planet Golarion. But them arriving is in a time period where humans aren't really a thing. They arrived in the age of serpents, in prehistory. So they were around with humans as human civilization developed in Golarion. And, it's an interesting thing to see that there is this juxtaposition between them. And certainly, Earthfall has created a pretty heavy divide. Yeah, early days, probably not great with humans. They're a much more developed culture during the Age of Legends, but certainly a lot of violence and things like that. And waiting like 8,000 years and coming back has certainly not been helpful for connections with another group that they've lived with in ancient days. But they're back. And they do have a kind of problem with their own decline, you know. They are definitely long-lived, but they just don't repopulate that quickly. And so they can't compete with a lot of the other species that are around when it comes to that kind of thing. So, will these elven nations retain themselves forever? Maybe. Maybe the Elves of Kyounin, the Mordant Spire, those in the Mualijae Expanse, those that have found their way into Varisia and their natural world there, can find some level of peace or exist forever. Will the elves ever be a true great nation that they once were? No. The nations that were on Golarion in the ancient days will never exist again. Those that dealt with the Aslanti, the Thessalonians, the Cyclopses, those nations won't exist. Will elves still be on their own apparent home planet, Castrovel, Savorian? Certainly they're still on Savorian, but I think it's the memory of Golarion which is important. Many immigrated to Golarion, and 8,000 years seems like a long time, and certainly it is. But in comparison to an elf's lifespan, to humans, it's not that long. Not that many generations. That memory couldn't still exist there of my ancestors came from this place. Because certainly they had millennia on the planet. The Age of Legends is a long time. It was a very long time, too. They had a lot of time to establish themselves. So the idea of coming back to your ancestral homes was probably strong within plenty of elves, especially many of those that returned. It's a lost home that they had, and it's just a strange juxtaposition of moving between places, and you can see it in the wanderlust that many elves get. It's probably because driving from home in so many ways and having to relocate so many times, it has an effect on your people as a whole. So having some entertainment, looking for some beauty, maybe pulling a prank or two, aren't terrible. Finding something interesting even if it's dangerous. And there are many interesting elves that remained behind. Plenty did. And they found their way in interesting homes and places throughout Golarion. From their frozen north of the crown of the world, the jungles of and deserts of Grund, all the way in TNZ, under the ocean. Elves have found a way to survive, and certainly, again, their culture will never reach that greatness. But you'll probably see them plenty of times. They have a way of adapting even stronger than perhaps humans in a way. Ecologically adapting to their environment. Something that humans who spend a lifetime in an area don't do. But an elf would. You live there for a couple centuries. And it's home in more ways than just, I've been living there. So, they're an interesting group. Anyway, we'll leave it here for today. Leave you on thoughts about the elves and some things that are some deep thinking about them and their interesting cultures and ways. I hope you learned some very interesting stuff about elves. And why they are interesting aliens to Golarion. Anyway, I hope you all will have a great rest of your day. Remember that every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I live stream these tabletop talks over on twitch.tv. We have Worm over here who chatted in chat a little bit earlier and has been just watching, as usually he does. You too could join live on those days, usually around 1 p.m., sometimes a little later than that. If you don't, check it out on YouTube. If you're here on Twitch, go to my YouTube side to see the entire thing or a lot of others' videos. And if you're on YouTube, hey, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. Remember, a good follow on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, comment, like the video on YouTube. These are all things that support it. Always more of these to come out in the future. I hope you'll hopefully learn more and enjoy these a bunch. I like talking about Golarions. I like deep diving into their lore. But anyway, remember, check out all those links and my Twitter and Discord for when I'm doing things and brain farts. So, until the next time, though, I'm going to say to all of you out there, I hope you learned something. Have a great day, and I'm going to give you a farewell.